Blessings of the Triple Gem, Teruan Saranai. Welcome to another Metta Lab weekly slow session. Hope this finds you well. Let's begin by paying homage to the Triple Gem. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dhamma, and homage to the Noble Sangha. As you know, we're continuing with our Metta Lab, our development of Metta with the 7 enlightenment factors, which culminates in liberation of mind by loving kindness. And we've been focusing on the Mettāsahagata Sutta. And we're coming to the end of this investigation and development of mettācetovimutti, this liberation of mind by loving kindness. And today we're going to look at the pinnacle or the culmination of this practice and also look at how this can be a doorway to Nibbana. So I'm going to launch straight in. Let's just quickly recap. What we've done so far is pivot from looking at painful practice with slow realization. We've used that as our baseline to build on this meditation that takes us to liberation of mind by loving kindness. And in the process of doing that, we activate the enlightenment factors and they start developing. And by the time we get to mettācetovimutti, liberation of the mind by loving kindness, these enlightenment factors are active. And so with this in mind, we spoke about building this metta house, and the culmination of these enlightenment factors being active means that they are the roof of the house. So in the first instance, we pick our meditation object, and for the purposes of the last few Metta Labs, we've been talking about asubhasanya, so the loathsomeness or repulsiveness of the body, or in terms of the repulsiveness of food. And we've taken that as our meditation object and developed that really, really well to build the first level of the Metta house. If we do that really, really well, then we get to the first mental absorption. So that means there can not be any sensual desire towards the physical nutriment, whether it's this body or whether it's food. And when this is the case, we're saying that, yes, we have temporarily subdued the hindrances, because if there's no sensual desire, then all those other hindrances don't get active, such as ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and then, of course, doubt. And that's one of the fundamental things. By following Buddha's words, we see for ourselves directly, our direct insight, that the mind lifts. And so the mind starts to get concentrated. So that's a very good first step, that first level. And then what we do is we look at this first establishment of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of the body. And so we apply what we've learned before in the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta, particularly with respect to form or this physical nutriment, and we put it through the formula that Buddha has given us, looking at the arising and passing away. And this is a very important step because this is the second level of our Metta house where we see, we're truly seeing it's because of craving that we come to suffer. You know, we directly see that. We see that in this is how we constructed this body. And in this lifetime, if we keep training the same thing, thinking that it's an innocent thing, it's okay, then what happens is all we get is the arising and passing away of craving, the arising and passing away of suffering. So there's no hope of getting out of samsara for us. But this meditation, this second level of building the Metta house, really gives us a very strong glimpse of that. And in that glimpse, we start to see impermanence as well, a very, very strong case for that. And so we are, at that point, lifting our heads out of the suraj, or like a worm in the cow dung. We're no longer thinking, oh, this is great, these sensual pleasures, these people, this food. For the first time, we're getting a really good glimpse that there's something else, because the mind goes into the first abiding if we contemplate the mindfulness of the body very well. So in that first abiding, what's really important is not to worry about where am I in the first abiding. So many questions come, am I in the second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana? At the point of developing this meditation, it's not important to speculate in your meditation, because what happens is once you start speculating and even having some doubt, then you fall from whatever you've managed to lift the mind to. When we reach the first abiding, just focus on the fact that the mind has become more uplifted, that the mind has seen something with direct insight for oneself through the mindfulness of the body, that we're no longer getting duped by thinking, oh, there's no danger in this. We're actually seeing that if we take delight, welcome, remain holding, that there's this delight in our mind, there's a greater value that we've assigned to the physical nutriment, whether it's the food or whether it's the people. And so we cling. And if we're clinging, then the mind keeps revolving around that. And then it becomes fuel for thinking, I can exist. And so when there's this idea of existence, we're literally putting money into this virtual money box saying, yes, let me have another one of these again. And so at the point of death, what would happen is we birth. And if there's birth, then there's aging and death, and then this whole mass of suffering. And so in the meditation, we say, oh, I've done this before. This is not what I want to do. And so, everybody else is doing the same thing. And so we realize, let me not run this dependent origination. Let me not do this. And so we give up the taking delight, welcoming, remaining holding, and we don't run the rest of the process. So it ceases. So that with the cessation of craving, we get the cessation of suffering. So we enter into the first abiding with that insight. So from the first abiding, what will happen is we want to protect that. With the first right striving, we're saying we don't want to come down into unwholesome states. We have the right view, 2 layers of the right view. We don't want at the level of right intention or right thought to come down from that. So that's why at the first right striving, we're saying, I'm not going to allow sensual thinking to arise. I'm not going to allow ill will thinking to arise. I'm not going to allow cruelty thinking or harmful thoughts to arise. For people who are having a very active life and involved with a lot of people in day-to-day dealings, then this first right striving is where a lot of effort needs to be applied in the meditation, because a lot of echoes of conversations, of dealings come up in the meditation. So someone who is leading quite a peaceful life, not actively working, not having to have lots of dealings with community or family members and things like that, then first right striving is almost like you can cruise through it because there's nothing that's pressing on your mind that wants to come up. But for people who are very busy with young families or having a lot of dealings with parents or having to work and deal with various different things, then, and even social engagements, things like that, what will happen is a lot of things may come to push you out of the first abiding, the Dibbavahara. So what needs to happen is one needs to actually apply to ensure that you protect the mind. And so if one does that, then that protects that first taste of Nibbana, that the mind is in a really elevated state at that second level of the Metta house. And then what we do is we contemplate noble truth of suffering, which is the first wonderful and marvelous idea. Like we've said before, this is to overcome any value that we've given to a post-perception of pleasure. So most of us, how we connect with that is often we think, oh, we do have a very good time with our loved ones. We do have a very good time, having dealings. We do glorify food and things like that. And so we keep going back to the food, keep going back to the people because we think that there's pleasure. But in this meditation, we're saying, okay, Buddha has told us we need to contemplate the first noble truth of suffering. Otherwise, we fall. Otherwise, whatever we've done in this first part of the meditation is going to fall. Because when we're indulging and enjoying, and we are very sensual beings, having been reborn into the sensual world, into this human realm, we actually take delight in so much pleasure. And often people think that it's because, we just love pleasure. But actually it's also because mainly when the pleasure declines, we try and fix it. And so we are trying to hold at bay the suffering or the pain or the discomfort or the unsatisfactoriness or something that has changed. either due to aging or due to just change. So this is where we misapprehend. And so we don't often understand this is part of our collective predicament. So that's why Buddha recommends we contemplate birth is suffering. And our birth is suffering is a whole gamut of things, from having to work, having to pay bills, having to look after parents, having to look after children, having to be told off, having to be abused, having to be spoken to in a way that we dislike, having to be betrayed, having to be taken to court, having to be accused of things that we feel we haven't done, having to be split from the people that we like, all kinds of different things, having to be subject to the rules of a government that change, having to be have challenges to the business that we run, having to be told that we no longer have a job, having to break up with partners, friends, family members. And then, of course, aging, and then sickness, and of course, death. So we contemplate those things because it keeps us very honest. And although we contemplate how we connect with it is personal suffering, what we need to also remember, whatever suffering we go through is unique to us, but at the same time, it's also not unique, because each and every person is going through similar but different things that fall into these categories of birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. So this third level of building the Metta house is a very, very important one, because we start to really see that there is suffering, and it's important not to discard it, not to reject it. And this is where the meditation really opens up for most people, because there's a lot of honesty and truth in Buddha's words. And when we connect with it, it's very strong. Because the question that comes up in this third level of this Metta house is, so what isn't lying and deceiving us? Because what we thought was pleasurable keeps declining, keeps changing, we construct it fails. So what is it that doesn't have those qualities of change, of being subject to construction and then failing? Time and time again, we have to keep trying to fix it, and we can never fully fix it. And so the answer becomes this first determination for the truth, and that is of Nibbana. When we have that very strong inclination towards Nibbana, saying nothing in samsara, and this very, very long samsara has been able to get us out of this mess, then the answer is Nibbana. And so it becomes a very strong thing, because we use our spiritual faculties, one of which is there is wisdom that we develop through these meditations, and that fuels, having come from right view, we get the wisdom. With the wisdom, our conviction towards this path that the Buddha is showing us becomes very strong. We lean on the qualities of the Buddha that manifest this Dhamma that he is teaching us, and what we have directly seen for ourselves up until this point. So our desire becomes for Nibbana, and that's how the mind goes to the concentration due to desire. It's a very strong concentration. And we realize that it's dangerous for us to not restrain our sense faculties, because we'll go back out into the world through our eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and therefore through those 5 faculties to the mind. So we protect that. So we can stay in this concentration for a very long time, actually, because it's very peaceful, and it's very strong, because there's something that has just relinquished worldly things, sensual things. We're no longer glowing with the bonds, the ties of the world. We're no longer going for the flood of sensual pleasures to fix anything. We're in this wonderful concentration that has a lot of wisdom contained within it. So then, to get to liberation of the mind by loving kindness, we contemplate about impermanence. Because up until this point, although we contemplated a little bit about impermanence in the step about mindfulness of the body, what we really focused on the first part of these meditation is about suffering. Because suffering is what really underpins how we get to loving kindness. When we understand that this predicament is collective, it's universal for all of us. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. pain, sadness, sorrow, lamentation, grief, or despair, it's suffering. Separation from what is pleasing, union with what is displeasing. We don't get what we want. At this step, when we contemplate, if we're born, we're subject to aging, we're really looking at this because we often deny aging. Aging of certain things that we're constructing, including this body and all different conditions as well. So it's really important to contemplate this aging phenomena because we see that we are always subject to change. And so if we're subject to aging, subject to change, then of course we see, yes, we're subject to sickness and death because often we discount all these things from the method of always trying to fix things. I can throw money at it. I can fix it somehow, some way. And the world is telling us that we can. But when we really take this into our mind and investigate and we really see, no, we can't, it's really out of our control for all of us, then we see there's no permanency. And so we ask the question, like, what are we really grasping onto, holding onto as this permanent perception of self? And the answer is, of course, the physical nutriment, this form, this body, if you will. And so you realize when you come back to even reflecting on the first part of the meditation, we know that this body is flawed. It's not subha. It's not beautiful. It's not wonderful. It's flawed. So we're holding on to something that is going to fail us. Each person is also doing the same, no matter what qualities they show in terms of material things, in terms of looks, in terms of all kinds of qualities. But at the end of the day, if we're all holding on to this physical nutriment, we're bound for not getting what we want and for this whole mass of suffering. And so even the idea of it is very strong and powerful. Loving kindness arises because we realize, oh, everybody is in the same boat. Everybody who misapprehends this may not have a way out. And so that's how we get to liberation of the mind, by loving kindness. When we develop it to this extent, and one thing I would say is that sometimes as we're learning the meditation, what people often say is, am I doing it right? And at different stages of the meditation. And what I would say is, trust in the pathway that Buddha has given us. As in, do the steps as best as you can without the thought, am I doing it right? Or I can't do it right? Or maybe I've got it wrong. There's something in having a conviction towards the insight pathway. And the more that you affirm the insight pathway, even in the development stage of learning this meditation, that's what makes the difference of whether you get to liberation of the mind by loving kindness. When you truly submit to the truth that Buddha is pointing to, that all of us can see, can be directly seen by all of us just by using our example, taking the meditation object, really looking at it without fear. So when that's the case, then you really see. So self-doubt, self-deprecation, restlessness of the mind, they're things that want to kick you out of the meditation. They're things that want you not to get to liberation of the mind by loving kindness. They're the things that don't want you to develop the bojjhangas, the enlightenment factors. And when you see that, you're adamant with great effort. I'm really going to do this meditation as best as I can. And the results speak for themselves at that point. We get to taste what Buddha is really talking about. We get to lean on Buddha's knowledge of that, and that is shared with us, and it's such a wonderful thing. So when we look at the definition of liberation of the mind by loving kindness, you can see when you reach the point of liberation of the mind by loving kindness, of course, when we see that this is our collective predicament, we don't want anybody to be oppressed. We don't want anybody to be injured. We don't want anybody to be disappointed. We don't want anybody to be deprived of finding freedom from suffering. We don't want anybody to be harassed. And so it naturally comes forth. It's not like you have to specifically do anything. If you follow the insight pathway, it's a natural thing Because when we directly see it for ourselves and then we realize everybody else is in this same boat, then we realize we don't want them to be harmed. We don't want them to bear hostility. We don't want them to have the pleasure and then be disappointed. Because we know if one grasps pleasure, then what you get is suffering. With that, we don't want people to be physically oppressed or mentally oppressed. We don't want people to be mentally experience pleasure, but then mentally experience the pain. We want to be free of this whole process. This is really something that's part of this development. You reach this point if you do the meditation well. And so we did cover before how we fortify the 7 factors of enlightenment through this process of developing this insight pathway. I won't go through it again because in the first instance, when you first develop it, it's really important to do the first part of knowing the meditation well. And once you've developed it well, you can start to look at the fortification process. And I've been through that in the second last, I think it was Metta Lab 14. So you can go back and listen to that when you get to the point that you're very skilled at being able to lift the mind to liberation of the mind by loving kindness. I find that reaching liberation is not a difficult thing if you practice and if you bank those steps. So those who have had direct sessions with me will know I often talk about banking. And I mean banking in the sense of every time we do certain meditation steps we don't want to do. So of course, with the first step of the meditation, we have to look at repulsiveness or loathsomeness of either the body or food. And you can pick other things as well, such as the death contemplation, or the other 2 as well. But the point is, it's often these meditation objects. It's painful practice. We don't want to do that. We think, oh, I don't want to meditate on that. But the thing is, when you start banking those steps, and I know people who've been working with me directly will know this, it's such a wonderful thing because this banking process really works, and it's an investment. Because once you've banked it, you don't always have to look at the 9 charnel grounds, the different states of decay of the body. Once you do it a number of times and you end up in metta, you realize that becomes something of a power that you have, something that you see very easily. And it's not a scary thing. It's something that's given great insight. But it's not something that you always have to go and look at each of the 9. It may be that you prefer just to look at the skeleton smeared with a bit of blood instead of the worms and the discoloration or the bloating and things like that. So we bank these steps, and even mindfulness regarding the body, being able to understand that aspect of the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta about arising and passing away, Samudaya Tangama, and that particular pathway. When we bank those steps, it's not that we have to do them so heavily again after a while, once we've developed this meditation well. So there's a lot of banking that we do, because when you really develop the direct insight, it's at your fingertips when you need it. You can't unsee the truth, put it that way. I recommend when we do this meditation is to spend a number of months really building up, a bit like how we did Metta Lab before, and we were talking about Karaniya Metta Sutta. And then after that, we looked at the painful practice with slow realization, building it to immeasurable metta. You spend a number of months developing the skill, because it is a skill. You memorize the steps, you understand what is needed, you understand the insights, and you keep peeling away the layers of what Buddha is showing through the insight pathway. And you know the key parts of the meditation that lift the mind. So the same goes with this meditation as well. And the skill actually becomes a power. So we spoke about in our last session, Metta Lab 15, if one wishes, one can see these various things. And we call them noble powers or potency, sometimes called supernormal power. So Arya Iddhi. When we spoke about it, I looked at it from the perspective of what appeared in Pethakopadesa, so the Pitaka disclosure, as well as looked at it from the Patisambhida Magga, which is attributed to Venerable Sariputta and the path of discrimination or textual analysis. These things, what I said before was when we've developed to the level of liberation of the mind by loving kindness, these noble powers are available to us. We can swap and change our perceptions. We can see things according to what is useful to us, to what is skillful, because we actually see things very, very clearly. And so in that sense, you can see that these Brahmaviharas are linked. Now, what I'd like to do today is actually look at some of these things in practice. So there are suttas that I mentioned before, like the Tikandaki Sutta. It's given as a separate teaching by the Buddha. It also appears in different middle-length discourses and also the Anguttara Nikaya and different places where it's taught separately or given as a skill, as the noble power. What I find is that when we develop liberation of the mind by loving kindness, and I've said it before, it's easy for us to actually see that we have these powers. The insight pathway that we're given is such that we can actually have these powers. So I wanted to go through some of those things to show how we can have these particular skills. So the first one is perceiving repulsive in the unrepulsive. I'll put this table up because I'm going to reference the Patisambhidamagga, so Venerable Sariputta's advice or instruction in the path of discrimination. So perceiving the repulsive in the unrepulsive, what we do is we see an agreeable object and we perceive it as foul or connecting with impermanence. And the reason we do that is because we don't want lust to arise or to have lust towards things that are provocative of lust. Say we have a food addiction that for some, whatever reason, we're foodies and cannot survive without thinking about food. So we know that if we want to overcome that, and we do this in our meditation anyway when we see the repulsiveness of food, if you look at undigested food through the faculties, would we want to eat it, taste it, as in smell it, look at it, touch it, hear about it, that sort of thing, then the mind rejects it. Likewise, food decay, will we want to eat food that's left out for 10 to 30 days, food waste? So what happens is it subdues the lust towards food. So that can be very helpful, particularly if we have health issues regarding food, particularly if we are afflicted with certain dietary issues. It also helps if we're staying in a monastery and we don't want to be obsessed about food, which is something that can be a hindrance when you're on 1 or 2 meals a day. Now, another one is, say, for example, one has a porn addiction, which is very prevalent in the world today. Likewise, if we are able to look at 32 body parts or investigate the 9 holes of the body, or even just taking one part of the body and thinking about that, say the skeleton. So no skin, no organs, but just the skeleton. Then when you see the body quite clearly, like the true nature of the body, what happens to the lust towards the body, it gets subdued. So that porn addiction becomes something that we can overcome. Now, it may not be pleasant doing that, but at the same time, it is a power being able to subdue the lust, not having greed towards bodies or food. Now, the same thing can be applied to other material things. So, for example, we might be very lustful towards clothes, gadgets, jewelry, houses, the next new shiny thing. And so the one that we would use instead of perceiving foul would be to connect it with impermanence. So, for example, when we think about clothes, well, we could contemplate, well, this thing won't last. Likewise, even with a house, which lasts for longer. But if you look at it, particularly in a humid country, it's so much easier to see. A newly painted house doesn't look so newly painted after quite a short time. Rust starts to appear, the paint starts to peel quite quickly because of the humidity in a place. But in that way, you actually contemplate the impermanent. It's subject to decay. Clothing, gadgets. Most of the time, these things become obsolete because of the decay. So the mental bonds towards agreeable objects get subdued. We see that we suffer when we need to try and maintain these things, and it's not possible because they're unlasting. They're subject to decay, unlasting. So that's how we can apply that in everyday terms. In terms of the disagreeable object, perceiving unrepulsive in the repulsive, Venerable Sariputta said perceiving loving kindness or connecting with elements. So take, for example, we still have a grudge with family members. Maybe we have found out that we're not included in their will. Maybe we were told off a long time ago, or they disapproved of our choices, who we married, or the job that we do, or certain life choices. So we're not included in a will, we're being ostracized by a family member, and so we feel not so great about that person. So they're a disagreeable object for us. When we apply loving kindness, when we even simply think, this relative is also subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death. This person may not understand this Dhamma. If they haven't penetrated this Dhamma, that means there's ignorance and craving. Therefore, they're still bound to this whole mass of suffering. They're bound to the karma. If their rebirth is based on their karma, and we know that they have both skilled and unskilled states, then it's a risk. There's danger for them. So loving kindness can arise when we understand that. I mean, we've learned that even in the Agata Pativinaya Sutta about looking at if we can't find even one good thing, whether it's by speech or body or even some concentration of the mind, then we reflect on that person's karma, reflect on what would happen at the end of their life. And this is a collective predicament. And so loving kindness naturally arises from that. It's when we measure and when we allow certain defilements such as anger to be there. But if we correctly cultivate loving kindness, then that's removed and we see things as they really are. And loving kindness can be there. Another example would be clashes with people at work. The same thing applies, that we need to understand that this is a universal predicament. Beings are the owners of their karma. And so even if someone has done us dirty at work, maybe they've betrayed us, maybe they've sabotaged us, maybe they've told us off, maybe they've sacked us, then it's an important thing to understand where we often get angry or where we often find people are disagreeable for right reasons or even wrong reasons. What happens is that's only one lifetime. But how many lifetimes have we been traveling in this samsara making karma with people over and over again? When will it end? When do we end the karma? And this loving kindness, whether it's immeasurable loving kindness or liberation of the mind by loving kindness, but the stronger one is the liberation of the mind by loving kindness, because there cannot be any obsession with ill will if we get to that state. Then there is tolerance for people because we understand this whole mass of suffering. We understand the arising and passing away nature of this existence. And we understand that the true liberation can only be Nibbana. So if anyone is subjected to more lifetimes in samsara, then what can those people expect? Suffering. And that's not something that we wish for people. The other thing is when we have a disagreeable object such as politicians or certain CEOs or certain neighbors or even certain religious leaders and people that have opposing views. Most of the time, like if I use the example of connecting with elements, this is really important to even be able to do this, is because when we contemplate elements, it removes any differences or inequality that we would usually perceive. When we don't perceive elements, usually what is kicking in for all of us is me and mine. And that's why me and my view, not your view. Me and my world, not your world. Me and mine in terms of the people I like and instead of whatever your group is. So when we actually contemplate elements, and we've discussed this before, that whatever is internal and external, whether it's earth element, air element, water element, or heat element, it's the same. So whatever is internal is the same as external. And so where we get to is, it's not me and mine. So this is not mine, this I am not, and this is not myself. So when we remove that, that's when we have true equality, that we're all the same as in these elements. And it takes out personalities, it takes out views, it takes out all kinds of differences. Any diversity, any impartiality, any exclusion. Metta has that quality because we don't divide and we don't label and we don't have stinginess towards what is not me and mine. When that's the case, then we're not blaming others. We're not clashing. We're not opposing each other. We don't fall into disputes and say, I'm right, you're wrong. It gets abandoned at that level. This can be very, very powerful. At that level, anyone who falls into disagreeable object becomes unrepulsive at that point. When loving kindness has been lifted, when we connect with the elements, we give up me and mine. We give up having ill will because we see the predicament. And so any of those beings become unrepulsive in our minds. So then the third one is perceiving repulsive in the unrepulsive and the repulsive. So this applies to both an agreeable and disagreeable object. And we see that we can perceive it as foul, so it's very similar to the first category, and also connect it with impermanence. And in this case, no lust arises towards things provocative of lust, and no hate arises towards things provocative of hatred. So we can interchange, as you can see even by these first three, we're interchanging our perception. And it becomes very skillful, because why abide in lust? Why abide in hatred? Why abide in both? Like, give them up. And it becomes very skilled in this respect. Say, for example, we have a beloved pet. And say, for example, it's a pet snake. As an owner of a pet snake that we love, we consider it unrepulsive. But to meditators who contemplate a snake, they would consider it repulsive in terms of the body, in terms of, say, the actual true nature of the snake's body, that is subject to arising and passing away. And therefore, when you're able to perceive that, you actually perceive repulsive in both repulsive and unrepulsive. It can be both an agreeable and disagreeable object. So agreeable object in the sense of that's agreeable to the owner of a pet snake. It's disagreeable to people who are scared of snakes. But when we meditate, we can see foul nature of the true nature of a snake's body. And also we can see the arising and passing away of the snake. It's dependently originated, and so it's subject to suffering. So we see it as repulsive. So we have no lust towards the snake, but neither do we have hatred towards the snake either. Same with children. Like often parents who meditate, they cling to children. And of course, to parents, a child is an agreeable object, whatever the age. That's my son, that's my daughter, that comes from me. And as a meditator, one can actually also contemplate 32 body parts, 9 wholes, see it as it really is. Also to see the arising and passing away nature. Like when we say being able to perceive repulsive, it's not that we fling that person away because we have this perception of repulsive. It's just a proper understanding with true knowledge that I don't want to have lust, as in greed, for this person, which means attachment. So when we take the example of children, society and the world says, yes, we must be very attached. But Buddha is saying it's not skillful to be attached, because if that's the case, at the end of our life, we would want to be reborn to that kind of family again. And we know that loving kindness says, kule suana nukido, not attached to families or groups. And the main reason is because it would reinforce me and mine. When we're able to see repulsive nature in something that is both unrepulsive and repulsive, then it's very helpful for us. It's part of our training. You're part of our training. So we still honor the relationship. We would still help our kids. We would still do what we can, have a relationship, but we wouldn't hold it tightly, because holding it tightly means we're misapprehending the truth. And they are also subject to dependent origination. They're also subject to impermanence, not lasting. So even at the point of, say, for example, they were to pass away sooner than us as parents, we have an understanding that they're the owners of their karma, that this is not something that we should be very surprised about if it should happen. Not that I wish it, but if it should happen. And so this Dhamma empowers us in a way that is very skillful, not to simply be duped, thinking that there's just beauty, that we can make it last, that it will give us long-lasting happiness. We can fix it. It's not true. Another thing in daily life would be when our things in our home break down. So a home appliance like a fridge, a stove, or something falls off the side of the house. So it's unrepulsive to us when it's working, but it's repulsive to us when it breaks down and it dies. And what's important is to see its nature, even in impermanence, that this thing is not built to last. It can't. It's like us. Our bodies are not built to last. So when something breaks down, we don't freak out, because something in us knows by doing these meditations, by being able to understand both repulsive and unrepulsive, but to see, actually, I don't want to have so much greed towards these gadgets in the house, or even to the house itself, because it's subject to impermanence. It doesn't last. And so that's a very good reflection. But when we see that true nature, it makes us wiser in our choices, and it also makes us able to withstand things constantly breaking down and just attending to them. So that becomes a power in that sense. And so you see, we don't get so angry and we're not so attached to things. Very, very helpful. And then the fourth one is perceiving the unrepulsive in the repulsive and the unrepulsive. So again, in a slightly different way, we're talking about a disagreeable object and an agreeable object. And in this case, again, similar to the second one, we perceive with loving kindness and we connect with the elements. Let's say we take the example of someone insults us at work. So to the person who receives the insult, so say we receive the insult, that's repulsive to us. We have been verbally abused and we don't like it. Yet to the person who said those words, they don't find it repulsive. It's unrepulsive to them. They think they're justified and fully commit to having those harsh words or insults. Now, when we understand with metta, we don't take that personally. We don't actually see that that person is harming us. If there's no anger there, we don't see it as that person is harming us. That person is simply having unskilled speech. That person is the owner of their karma. And we can also remember the Agata Pativinaya Sutta. So they may have unskilled speech, but they may have good bodily conduct, for example. And so we can focus on that. Or maybe, for example, they have an ability to concentrate the mind, that at times they have the right view. We can concentrate on that. So there's certain other things that we can apply here, and that can be also helpful. Likewise, like what we said before about the elements, when we see that internally, externally, these elements, these four great elements, it's all the same. We let go of me and mine. Then at the level of someone insulting us, we can let that go. We can see, actually, it's nothing. It just evaporates, particularly at the level of liberation of the mind by loving kindness. That strongly also has a level of not me and mine in it. So when we see this is not myself, I'm not this, and this is not mine, it's very easy to allow those words to evaporate and to not even have bad wishes to that person, because we know that unskilled speech is so bad for people. The gravity of it, they're the owners of that result. So you can see in that case no hatred towards things provocative of hate. Like Venerable Sariputta being accused of something by a monk. He doesn't believe that. He doesn't allow it to enter into the mind. He abides with the liberation of the mind by loving kindness. He has this noble power. And so there is also no lust towards one's own body. So if it's not me and mine, then those insults don't hit something because we're not holding on to the physical nutriment. So if you remember, when we get to liberation of the mind by loving kindness, we are equanimous because we're not holding on to this physical nutriment. The level of liberation of the mind by loving kindness is saying, yeah, I'm not holding on to this body. So whatever you're saying to insult it, it just evaporates. Another example is when people hold views. So for example, say someone, particularly worldly events like Palestine versus Israel, Ukraine versus Russia, China versus the US, Christianity versus Islam, LGBTQ versus the opposite of that. So when we measure and things, often we think that, oh, if someone is lifting and raising, then and people often believe they're on the side of good, no matter which side that they're on. But often, whatever side you're on, you believe you're on the good side. But what happens is when you look at this disagreeable object, so say, for example, if you are in Russia, the disagreeable object may be Ukraine. If you're in Ukraine, the agreeable object would be Ukraine. So you see that there's an impasse in these things because there's opposition. In whatever stance you take, whether it's on gender, whether it's on countries, whether it's on any kind of dispute, religion, sexual orientation, any kind of thing. And often people think that when you go towards some kind of view and you raise that view above another view, that there's equality there, that there is kindness there, that there is some kind of liberation there. But that's not the case. As we've seen from where the world is at, it's provocative of hate. Although it may be unrepulsive to the person holding the view, it is repulsive to the opposition. And from both juxtapositions, you just turn that around and it becomes agreeable, disagreeable object for whatever it is. So that is no metta in that. There's no metta at all. And even trying to force equality on people is not metta either, because it doesn't come from a common place. It doesn't come from a common place of we're all human beings. It doesn't come from a place of we're all made up of the same elements. When we get to liberation of the mind by loving kindness, that all falls away. The opposition about what's agreeable, disagreeable, having opposing views. What you end up seeing is, views aside, we're all in the same boat. So whether one lives in Ukraine, Russia, China, US, Australia, Sri Lanka, Israel, Palestine, somewhere in South America, somewhere in Southeast Asia, Australia, what have you, or whatever sexual orientation, gender, what have you, where are we all the same? We're all subject to birth. With birth, subject to aging, sickness, and death. And what does Buddha say? Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. And so at that level, that's where the hate falls away. That's where the lust falls away, because all we do is we attach to things that are subject to aging, sickness, and death. We end up in this vicious circle. And so when you see it and you see everybody else is doing the same thing over and over again, the hate falls away. And the wise person doesn't want to attach, doesn't want to have lust towards something that is going to be subject to suffering over and over again. And when you see other people continually doing that, you realize, why would I hate this person? And so you can bring to the mind, like any politician, Donald Trump, Keir Starmer, Tony Blair, whoever it is that comes to the mind from your country that is disturbing the mind, or another kind of world leader that is disturbing the mind, or a neighbor that has opposing views that is disturbing the mind. And you can see that when you bring them to the level of liberation of the mind by loving kindness, it falls away. It has to. When you do the proper contemplation of the four great elements and you give up me and mine, it falls away. And so that's why it's unrepulsive. That person becomes unrepulsive, whereas that person was repulsive before because of their view, because of their acts and their deeds, because of their speech, because of their missteps. And so that's where it becomes quite powerful not to have hatred or attachment. Another example is even on the side of good stuff. Like we listen to monks, nuns, lay people speaking Dhamma, and they're pointing to Nibbana as the object of the meditation. They speak about things about renunciation and encourage generosity, to develop virtue, and to heed the Buddha's words. To a worldly person, that's repulsive because what they're interested in is things that are pertaining to greed, hatred, and delusion. They want power, they want fame, they want material wealth. But those who are developing the Noble Eightfold Path, it's unrepulsive to hear that monk or nun or lay person speaking Dhamma because they value Nibbana. They value the path that leads to non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. So when you think about that, say, for example, loving kindness, when you see the Dhamma correctly, it becomes unrepulsive. Like when you see that this is the predicament, whether you like the person saying this Dhamma, but when you see it very, very clearly, and you give up your views about, particularly worldly people, you give up your views about this or that, and you start to understand not self, not me and mine, you start to really cultivate loving kindness. You realize, oh, this person is doing a good thing. Why would I have hatred towards them? Because they're pointing to liberation. They're pointing to freedom from suffering. That surpasses whatever view I have in this lifetime, whatever opposition I have to what they're saying, whatever I perceive as them taking my pleasures away. So that can be quite helpful as well. And then the last one is about avoiding both the unrepulsive and the repulsive and dwelling equanimously, mindful. So this was an interesting one from the perspective of what Venerable Sariputta has put in Patisambhidamagga, that if you take any object and on contacting that object with each of the sense faculties, one is neither glad nor sorry and abides in equanimity, mindful and clearly comprehending. And so when we do this, there's no lust that arises and anything that is provocative of lust. And same with the hatred and same with the delusion. So what we see here, when we talk about mindful, we're really talking about understanding pleasure and joy from any object that we've seen through that. And clearly comprehending or having some awareness is really about understanding pain and sadness when it comes to objects, that you see the dichotomy of if you go towards pleasure and joy, then you're going to get the pain and sadness. Equanimity always comes from being mindful and clearly comprehending that you want to give up both. So when we do liberation of the mind by loving kindness, when we understand that the physical nutriment, any object, any form, we want to get out of the pleasure and pain of grasping onto these things because we don't want to have the lust, hatred, or delusion towards these things. We've seen through it. When we understand that, that's why we go to equanimity. Say, let me avoid both repulsive and unrepulsive. That's when we're mindful and clearly comprehending. So when we look at seeing a visible object with the eye, this applies to seeing parents that we love, or our child, or even in-laws. You know, all the different things that come with that. When we see the physical nutriment as it really is, we've gone through the pathway, we understand. Equanimous. Whether it's colleagues, a politician that we like or dislike, whether it's a Dhamma teacher that we like or dislike, whether it's friends that have betrayed us or friends that have been with us up until this point from childhood, equanimous. We come out of that. We don't grasp onto that. Likewise, hearing a sound with the ear, whether it's our favorite music, or the voice of a person we love, or whether it's a dog incessantly barking, or whether it's the screeching noises of the cars. It's like there's equanimity applied, seeing through those things. If we grasp onto pleasure, we get the pain when it changes, when it subsides. Same with smelling an odor or fragrance with the nose. Having preferences towards rubbish smell versus, cooking smells. Our favorite fragrances versus something that's really stinky. Come out of that. Being more equanimous towards that. Likewise, tasting flavors with the tongue. Measuring something's bitter, something's salty, something's sweet, something's pleasant, something's tart, something's sour, something's astringent. We measure all the time, but when we understand that we don't want to take those things one way or another, to have a preference that this is good, this is not good, come out of that, there's a lot of liberation in that. And then when it comes to touching a tangible object with the body, we know we have preferences, the softest material versus something that's abrasive. How we feel about touching a pet, the softness of a kitten versus having to touch something that's prickly. Even around holding hands with a loved one, touching, someone's skin versus being burnt by something. So these are the things that when we understand the physical nutriment, through our senses, we don't allow these preferences. We see it for what it really is, and we actually come out of it. And then cognizing an idea with the mind. Thoughts of generosity versus thoughts of telling someone off. Thoughts of killing versus thoughts of kind words. So we realize that we don't want to get locked into any of those things because the mind syncs with those things as well. So our power becomes a potency in the sense of being able to be equanimous, knowing that there's danger in going for pleasure or pain, joy and sadness. And when we lean in this direction, not going with any object, being equanimous, getting to liberation of the mind by loving kindness, activating bojjhangas up to the point of the enlightenment factor of equanimity, what we see is we're closer to Nibbana. And so that's the noble power that's very high in that regard. What we're understanding is that when we attain to the liberation state, as an example, what we're understanding is the faculty of pleasure and the faculty of joy. That makes us mindful. When we understand the faculty of pain and the faculty of sadness, we're clearly comprehending. And so we go to equanimity, which is neither pain nor pleasure. So we understand this about this physical nutriment. When we say, even in that final step, having understood on impermanence, and we say, I'm not going to hold on to the physical nutriment, whether it's through any of these sense faculties, what we're really saying is, I'm giving up pleasure or pain. I'm giving up this dichotomy of experience to go to equanimity, which is neither pain nor pleasure. And we're leaning heavily towards Nibbana. So hopefully that helps in terms of some examples to flesh out this noble power of potency. And I highly recommend that when you start to use your own examples to test this out, develop to the level of liberation of the mind by loving kindness, because it's easier to see this way. Normally when the mind is in a more hindered way, it's obstructed, there's still the hindrances there, there's still the defilements there, it's very hard to see the noble power of potency. Some of them may be easier than others, but it's often that our preferences and our unuplifted mind makes it difficult for us to get out of lust, hate, and delusion. So we can't see the benefit. We're still imbued with the lust, we're still imbued with the hatred, and we're still imbued with the delusion. So when you lift your mind to liberation of the mind by loving kindness, it's much easier to see. So we've done the hard work, and we see that when I say it's at our fingertips, you'll get a sense of what I mean, because any example you take is like, oh yeah, it is present now after the meditation. So try it that way. So if we look at this last part of the sutta, where the Buddha is actually saying, so or else he enters and dwells in the liberation of the beautiful, because the liberation of the mind by loving kindness has the beautiful as its culmination, I say, for a wise bhikkhu here who has not penetrated to superior liberation. If we develop liberation of the mind by loving kindness for a long time, we eventually come to this liberation of the beautiful, because if you imagine it, there is no obsession with ill will. We understand fully that these bodies are subject to being repulsive, meaning they will fail us, that's the true nature of the body, whether it's 32 body parts, whether it's 9 holes, whether it's seeing the body decay, whether it's seeing the death contemplation, the different corpse stages of the body. Same goes with food, seeing the decaying nature, seeing how it really is. When you see that, and then you see that it's dependently originated, subject to arising and passing away, it's out of craving that there's this suffering, then you also see that our predicament is set towards suffering. When you understand this as a collective predicament, and when you reach liberation of the mind by loving kindness through contemplating impermanence in a very strong way, and you give up the physical nutriment, then you see everybody else is in the same boat. Everybody else is being oppressed, is being troubled, is being harassed, is being disappointed, is being subject to this enmity, harassment, is subject to pleasure and pain over and over again without knowing how to get out of it. Then loving kindness at the superior level sees all living beings as unrepulsive. So this is what it says in the Vimokkha Kata, which is part of Patisambhidamaka. It says, here a bhikkhu dwells intent upon one quarter with his will imbued with loving kindness, likewise the second quarter, likewise the third quarter, likewise the fourth quarter. So above and below and around, he dwells intent on the entire world, everywhere and equally, with his will imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, measureless, free from affliction. Because of the development of loving kindness, beings are unrepulsive. Such is the liberation described thus. He is resolved upon only what is beautiful. So you can see we have no opposition to anybody. We have simply loving kindness. So all beings, when we see the predicament fully, we have that direct insight, having gone through it ourselves with the meditation pathway, then all beings are unrepulsive. We don't wish this samsaric predicament on any living beings. And so that's how we reach liberation upon what is beautiful. And so it's like we've climbed this mountain, we've built this metta house, activated the bojjhangas, and we've reached that stage where we're in a very, very good place and we're just staying there. And so it becomes this very, very sublime, peaceful frequency that we're tuned into. And I like to think about the next Buddha, because we know the name of the next Buddha is Buddha Mettā. So the Buddha that is primarily around loving kindness. Also like to think about the Arahants who exist in the pure abodes, who've completely cut off the taints and have perfected all the Brahmaviharas. I like to think about those who have perfected it, because those that have fully penetrated what it means to reach Nibbana, attain Nibbana, realize the oppression of samsara, realize the disappointment, the harassment, the real predicament of this. We don't fully grasp it because we still, in our daily life, keep thinking we can fix it. We keep turning to pleasure and constructing pleasure when pain arises. So when pleasure gets diminished and pain arises, we try and fix it. Or we go towards pleasure to circumvent any pain that might be coming towards us. So that's how we operate. But an arahant who is cultivating loving kindness to such a strong degree, there's something in that frequency that helps us. And so I like to contemplate that and reflect on that when I've reached liberation of the mind by loving kindness. And you really see that. You really see liberation of what is beautiful at that point when you develop for a very long time. So the mind gets very unafflicted with ill will, unoppressed, and it's in a very, very good place. If you test it and you think about politicians in the world that people dislike, if you think about countries that people hate, if you think about one's own history with relatives, with old bosses, old colleagues, if you think about friends who've betrayed us, all those sorts of things, you bring them to the mind when you've developed this for a very long time in your meditation, and liberation is up, and whether it's liberation of the mind by loving kindness or liberation of what is beautiful, it just evaporates. None of those names of people, things register. They just are in the frequency of that vast, immeasurable loving kindness. There's no affliction, like as it says here, abundant, exalted, measureless, free from affliction. So when you even bring a name to your mind in liberation, nothing registers. It's like that person is included in this field. That person is in here. This person is included. If, for example, you dislike Trump, if, for example, you dislike Putin, if, for example, you dislike your neighbor, you think about that person in liberation and nothing comes up other than to register they're included. And so that's where this becomes such a wonderful thing. In a world that is subject to wars, to so much divisiveness, to so much swaying in the news towards this side, that side, towards all kinds of different perspectives on what is right and wrong and what is good and bad, and you should think this and you should think that. We do a world of service to the world if we cultivate this kind of meditation practice, because we would genuinely wish for people not to be afflicted by all of those views, all of that divisiveness, all of that oppression, all of that forcing other people to come to my view. When we are liberated by loving kindness and even by the beautiful, it's just a completely different state of the mind. Now, the last thing I wanted to cover was about attaining Nibbana. In this Nagara Sutta, this is in Majjhima Nikaya, discourse number 52, there was this householder named Dasama of Nagara who visited Venerable Ananda to ask if the Buddha had proclaimed one thing, that if one abides diligent, ardent, and resolute, that their unliberated mind would become liberated, that their undestroyed taints become destroyed, and that they attain supreme security from bondage that they haven't attained before. He went to Venerable Ananda, and Venerable Ananda then answered, explaining that there are 11 meditations that serve as doorways to Nibbana. So this is just one example. I mean, there are many liberations that serve as doorways to Nibbana, and there also can be whittled down to 3 doorways to Nibbana as well. When we look at this, what I've taken from that sutta is just the one pertaining to liberation of the mind by loving kindness, because this is what we're focusing on. So what it says here is, again, a bhikkhu abides pervading 1 quarter with a mind imbued with loving kindness, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above, below, around, and everywhere, and to all living beings, he abides pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. He considers this and understands it thus: this liberation of mind through loving kindness is conditioned and volitionally produced, and whatever is conditioned and volitionally produced is impermanent, subject to cessation. So I just stop there for 1 second. So we do know that when we do these meditations, we are constructing our meditation. We are wielding this according to the Buddha's instruction, and that's why even these liberations are not Nibbana, because they're still constructed. Therefore, whatever loving kindness that we're spreading, cultivating, developing, it's also impermanent, subject to cessation. So it's not liberating in the ultimate liberation sense. Then it goes on to say, if he is steady in that, he attains the destruction of the taints. But if he does not attain the destruction of the taints, because of that desire for the Dhamma, that delight in the Dhamma, then with the destruction of the 5 lower fetters, he becomes one due to reappear spontaneously in the pure abodes, and there attain final Nibbana without ever returning from that world. This too is one thing proclaimed by the Blessed One, who knows and sees, accomplished and fully enlightened, wherein, if a bhikkhu abides, diligent, ardent, and resolute, his unliberated mind comes to be liberated, his undestroyed taints come to be destroyed, and he attains the supreme security from bondage that he had not attained before. So this is interesting because often people think it's not possible to attain Nibbana through loving kindness. And what Venerable Ananda is saying is the Buddha has said it is possible. But the key thing to understand here is around the destruction of the taints. In Venerable Ananda's teaching here, he doesn't give the instruction of how one does it, but what he's pointing to is that if one knows how to do that, and we know it's one of the 3 knowledges, the knowledge of the destruction of the taints, then it is possible to actually go from the liberation of the mind by loving kindness and then to destroy the taints. And of course it says here, if one doesn't do that, then one would be reborn in the pure abodes, having the desire for the Dhamma, the delight in the Dhamma. So one would be an anagami, so a non-returner, born to one of the 5 pure abodes. And from there, one would not return, but attain parinibbana from that particular realm, whichever one that is. The Buddha has highlighted in this Mettāsahagata Sutta that supramundane, so liberation of the beautiful, as the culmination in that sutta. So in that particular one, he had said, unless you have penetrated to a superior liberation. So we are referencing here if one has destruction of the taints or another liberation like liberation of the signless, liberation of emptiness, or liberation that is desireless. Those are the 3 key ones that the Buddha often talks about because they're linked to non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. The most significant one is the signless one because that's the one that's linked with non-delusion. If we are able to have knowledge of the destruction of the taints, then this becomes that doorway to Nibbana. So it's important to know that. Now, when we develop the powerful knowledge of the noble truth of suffering, this definitely helps us to cut off, as an example, the taint of sensual desire, because we would not fall for this post-perception of pleasure that we keep talking about. So this idea of pleasure is being cut off. And so that means that we won't go from the taint of sensual desire to the taint of ignorance, thinking, let me reconstruct this again. Let me fall for this again and activate these other taint of existence and taint of views. Now, of course, there's a deeper Dhamma behind that, and we're not going to go through that here because that would take a series of talks about destruction of the taints. But even here, because we've seen through the physical nutriment, through our meditation of liberation of the mind by loving kindness, what have we seen? We've seen the repulsiveness of the physical nutriment. We've investigated the arising and passing away phenomena of the physical nutriment, that it's unlasting. We've interrogated and investigated, birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering, and we get this whole mass of suffering. So we know it's not worth taking as me and mine. We want to give up this physical nutriment. And so if we develop further that we mustn't be duped by those things, the only supreme safety is Nibbana, then we can see a little glimpse of how we don't activate those taints, that we actually want to destroy them. And so I think the important thing here is that when we eventually develop wisdom of the destruction of the taints, the knowledge of the destruction of the taints, the knowledge that we destroy rebirth by wanting to come back to be born again, and we no longer search for any kind of existence, then that is where this truly becomes the doorway to Nibbana, like one of the doorways to Nibbana. If you have any questions about the meditation, if you have any questions about your specific meditation or around some of the Buddha's words or Venerable Sariputta's words, then do let me know. You can email I wish you well in the development of this practice. May you grow in all the blessings of this Dhamma that the Buddha has given us. So let's pay gratitude to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Gratitude to the Noble Ones for helping us with this Dhamma. Gratitude to our past and present teachers who continue to help us with this Dhamma. Gratitude to our parents and all the Kalyana Mittas on this journey who've travelled with us and who are still travelling with us. And we can dedicate the merit from this session with any departed relatives who may need some merit. Think of them now. And we can share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem to all of you. May you continue to grow in wholesome qualities. And may you be blessed with conducive conditions for practice and surrounded by Kalyana Mittas. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Terawan Saranai.